Hey, Shalom, water for joining. We're about to get started right now. Make sure. Shalom, water for joining. Today's lesson is entitled the five empires and then the end. Right, and what I'm talking about is the vision that Daniel the prophet, who was a Hebrew Israelite, right? You would see him today as a so-called Negro, right? He was from the tribe of Judah, okay? And again, that would make him a true biblical Jew, who today the American Negro and basically is, okay? That's who the true biblical Jews are. Now that being said, exactly, where are people waking up? So Shalom Makiyam. So let's get started. We're going to talk about the five empires which Daniel prophesied would come before the second coming of the Messiah, okay? And we're going to break that down, and when we break it down, we're going to explain how that shows us, you know, how that we're living in the end days, okay? So just to prove it biblically, so that way people could, if they ever wondered, how is it that we know that we're living in the last days? Well, this is one of the foundational prophecies, or the foundational knowledge of the Bible that you're supposed to understand when the coming of the end is, and also to kind of go through what we know as history, which is what confirms what prophecy said would go down. Okay, so let's go and get started by giving all honor, glory, and praises to Yahawah, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, RAWCHAA, Barakah Yahawah, Barakah YAHAWASHI, Barakah Yahawah, Barakah YAHAWASHI, Barakah Yahawah, Barakah YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, RAWCHAA. Double honors to my teachers, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, who are the house of David, reborn again in this generation. And Shalom to the 130 Yasharallah, who today we're known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage, we were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. So, like I said, today's lesson is entitled The Five Empires and Then the End. Okay, because that's what we're currently living at. We are currently in the end days, okay? And what does that mean, right? Does that mean that the whole world is going to blow up and basically we're not going to exist anymore, right? It's just going to see a bunch of, a big explosion and then just a bunch of stardust? No. What that means that at the end of the five empires, which Daniel, well, you know what? Let's go and read this first before I get into that explanation. This is Romans 15 and 4. For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the scriptures, might have hope. So there you go. So right here, as it told us in the book of Romans, all these things that came before, right, going all the way back to the book of Genesis. All these things were recorded and saved from times, immemorial, from before, in the very beginning, right? Because why? Because there was ultimately going to be a generation in the end of what, right? The end of this experiment, end of this dispensation of time. Okay, that dispensation of time is from when we start off in the book of Genesis, right? At the point where we are introduced to Adam and Eve. Yes, there was previous, people that came before that, referred to the Adamites and the previous world civilizations. But again, that doesn't concern us. Okay, all that information is occultic information, as it's referred to today. Okay, the thing is, it's okay to know about it, but you're not to give it any sort of weight. That being said, from our biblical dispensation of time, from the time of Adam until the times that we're living in right now, until the time when the Messiah shows up in, back with his thousands of chariots, which are to us known as UFOs. When the Lord shows up, that's going to be the dispensation of time that the Bible is talking about, okay? Now, during this whole time, from the beginning of Adam and Eve to the time when the Messiah shows up, again, who was Adam and Eve, or who was Adam, excuse me, right? The Messiah, YAHAWASHI, when he shows up, that's the end time. Now, that end time doesn't mean, like I said, anything is going to end for us or for the world. The only thing that's really going to end for us Israelites, the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, is our time in captivity, okay? And the Lord is going to basically put us back in our proper position. You see, because throughout all of history, from the time recorded in the beginning of Genesis all the way to to the prophecies written by John the Revelator, you see the chosen seed which the Lord has been working on. Let me actually get it real quick. This is the plant that the Lord refers to. It says in the second Ezra's 9 and 21, and I saw and spared it greatly, and have kept me a grape of the cluster, and a plant of a great people. Let the multitude perish then, which was born in vain, and let my grape be kept, and my plant, for with great labor have I made it perfect. Okay, what is spoken there in 2nd Ezra is the culmination of work, of selective breeding and selection of one group of people over the other, over one brother over the other. Okay, we've seen this when it was, you know, when God chose Abel over Cain. Eventually it got given to Seth. When the Lord chose Shem over his brother Japheth or Ham. And then down below that, the fifth nations, when it goes down, that came out of Shem, the Lord chose Arphaxad instead of Arphaxad's other four brothers. And it goes all the way down until the final separation, which was between Esau, who is the progenitor of today's Caucasian and Israeli race, and Jacob, who is the progenitor of the Negro, Latino, and Native Americans, our forefathers. Okay, that was the last separation. And from all the line that came out of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, or Yasharal, right? Because that's Hebrew for he prince power. Okay, so that way you understand what our name Yasharal or Israel means, right? It means he prince power. We're the children of God. Okay, right? Because again, what is a prince? A prince is the child of the king. Okay, so that being said, right here it tells us that great plant that the Lord created, that plant is the chosen seed line, starting with Adam, and even before them. Because remember, Adam and Eve were the selection from a group of people that came before. So that being said, when you go all the way down to Esau and Jacob, God chose Jacob, and from that line, that's where you get your Negro, Latino, Native Americans from. Okay, and that's who we are. But again, we're in the state of captivity where we're basically underneath our enemies. And again, this is why we don't have our original last names. This is why you find the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, we all have the same history, where we were conquered by our enemies who came from the other side of the world, spoke a language which we knew not of, right? Basically, again, remember, think about that, right? All of us, the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, came over here to this side of the world all through ships, right? First, the Northern Kingdom did it on our own volition. We came over here on ships, and we stayed here for about 2,400 years before we were found and then put into captivity, right? Right? It was a very prolonged judgment, but it ultimately prophecy played out in our situation. Now, on the other hand, for the Southern Kingdom brothers who stayed in the land of our homeland of Israel, they stayed there until, what was it, about 70 AD, when they were last kicked out by the Romans, right? And again, the Romans of that time were the Edomites, the Caucasian and Israeli race. Okay, then eventually, after 70 AD, the Israelites who got kicked out of Jerusalem, right? A lot of them went into the Roman slave markets, right? And this is where you get a lot of the black Negro aristocracy within Rome. And this is when Rome fell to the Southern Kingdom of Israel. But again, that's a whole other bit of information and history that I don't want to digress into. But again, we've seen that the Israelites, that great plant that the Lord has cultivated all the way back from the time of Adam, all the way until right now, is us, the Israelites, the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, right? And the great labor that the Lord did is leading us Israelites throughout what we know as history, right? From him cutting off certain people to raising up, protecting other people, making sure that, what does the scripture say? That is through the Lord's mercy that we are not cut off, right? Because again, when you look at the Israelites, the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, throughout history, we've gone through so many events, conquests, and basically just wars, that it's surprising that we weren't cut off as a people, right? The North Atlantic slave trade that decimated the Southern Kingdom, right? The Native American enslavement that happened from the Europeans, right? I think it was like 80% of Latinos were like cut off, right? So the point being is that the true Holocaust happened with our people, the true Israelites of the Bible. So that being said, all that hard labor the Lord did ultimately was for us. And like it tells you here, let's read that one more time. The Lord said that he would make sure to keep us and not the other nations. Let's read that. It says, verse 22, let the multitude perish then, which was born in vain, and let my grape be kept and my plant, for with great labor have I made it. So you see the Latinos, Negroes, and Native Americans, we are that grape, okay? We're that plant that the Lord has worked so hard to keep. Now the thing is now in these days, just like prophecy says, the Lord would wake us back up again. That when you get into what is it, Ezekiel 37, the valley of dry bones, how the dry bones would start to move again. They would have the Lord would put on the flesh, the sinews, the muscles, right? And then he would breathe the breath of life back into these dead bones, who was the house of Israel. Well, that's us, right? And right now, those who are awakening right now, who are being made fun of, or basically not being, we're not being given any sort of celebrity in this kingdom, right? Because again, Esau, he knows what's going on, and he tries to set up these agents and basically try to what's the term? He tries to belittle this movement, right? And he tries to make nothing of the truths and everything that come out. All our victories that have been found within this truth of ours have all been silenced, okay? They haven't been exalted, right? To answer the brother Emmanuel Hernandez, yeah, there's definitely Israelite foreigners in North Korea and all these other nations. They are going to read the book of Revelation 7. If you go back into my videos, you'll be able to look up the lessons I did on Revelation 7 that explain how there's going to be nations or Israelites coming out of there's going to be at least one Israelite coming out of all the 197 nations that the UN recognizes today. Okay, the Israelite seed line has mixed in with all of the other 17 biblical nations upon the face of the earth, and this is the same thing with the seed of the wicked, the biblical Edomites. They've all mixed within all the other 17 nations. Okay, so this is why every one of the 18 biblical nations that exist all the 18 biblical nations that exist, all of them are a mixture of three group of people, okay? The sons of God, that would be the bloodline that comes from Jacob, Israel, okay? Who predominantly today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans. The other 16 nations, which are the sons of God, okay? Those are just the other nations that came of Ham, Japheth, and Shem, okay? And then you have the third group of people. That would be the seed of the wicked. That wouldn't be your Edomites, okay? The descendants from Esau. Okay, so those three lineages are going to come out of every nations. Yeah. The mixing of the Israelite seed line didn't happen in the late captivities, right? Talking about the Native American captivities under the Europeans, or the so-called Negro captivity here under the Europeans and the Americans and all these things. The mixing of our people happened all the way back in biblical times. When you get into, I think it's the book of Isaiah, talking about there's a story or an allegory about two sisters, Aliba and I forgot their names, but there's two sisters, and those two sisters went a whoring with these other men, right? What that is an analogy of is the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom of Israel basically intermarried and mingled amongst all the darker Hamitic races down around where the tribe of Judah or the southern kingdom was, right? This is why they come out in a darker skin tone than us. The northern kingdom, we basically also would intermix with the Assyrians and and I think they were the Hittites up by where Turkey's at. But again, it tells you that we lost our strength. It tells you in the scriptures too, right? How when we would intermingle with these other nations, we would dilute ourselves. Okay, and that's ultimately, and that's funny because I was just watching that video with Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes today. You know, and it's funny, right? Both of them were wrong when it came to intermixing within race, right? Because again, it doesn't. Their understanding was completely wrong. Candace, not realizing that she's bringing forward the Edomite seed line, her enemy seed line, didn't realize that Nick Fuentes was correct. That the Lord ultimately doesn't want mixing, right? The Lord wants, for example, the Israelites, the Negro Latino and Native Americans, to stay within ourselves. It tells you here in the scriptures about to not give our daughters or our sons over to them in marriage, and don't take their sons and daughters in marriage. But what's happened, right? The devils of this world, the top devils, the Amalekites, which are Edomites, right? The so-called Israelis, they themselves push this whole race mixing. Because why? Because they want to mix all the seeds. So yeah. So ultimately, you see, and also the slave trade and the Arab slave trade. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. So this brother Emmanuel brings out the sub-Saharan slave trade, which took place around 600 AD. It actually was going all the way until like the 1600s. That was the trade where Saudi or the Arabian Peninsula, for the most part, and really all the known world at that time, the Eastern Hemisphere, was participating in the Silk Road, right? That large, avenue of traffic that basically spread over all the Eastern Hemisphere. There was a large need of slaves in that world society back then in those times, and a lot of those slaves came out of Africa during the 600 AD onward, and a lot of those slaves that came out of the Africa were the Israelites who had fled into Africa to hide amongst the Hamite brethren down there, just like our forefather Abraham did, just like YAHAWASHI and his parents did, right? And Moses did this too. See, so what happened is those Israelites who were preyed upon from 600 on forward in the sub-Saharan slave trade, they also started to mix in with other nations, right? This is where you get a lot of the Moors from, okay? The Moors were Israelites who had gone into slavery, into the Arab and the Hamite or the African Hamite slave markets, and they got bought up by a lot of Ishmaelites, Arabs, okay? Remember, Arabs descend from Abraham's first son, who was rejected by God because his mother was an Egyptian, right? Hagar and stuff. Well, that being said, it was really fucked up for the Southern Kingdom brothers because Ishmael was a fucking devil, and he basically castrated the majority of the Arab slaves, okay, that he would take in. But the other ones, but some Jakes who had gone into slavery under Ishmael or under Ham, what happened was, if they took on the religion of their masters, that being Islam, they wouldn't then fall into the castration lot or the subjugation lot. They would be free, but they would have to be practicing Islam. So this is where you get the Moors from. This is where you get the very dark-skinned Arabs from, right? Because that was our people, the Southern Kingdom of Israel, namely mixing in with Ishmael and also mixing in with Ham, okay? And that's where you get where Spain got taken over by the Arabs and stuff, and and they were Moors and they were extremely rich. Yep. Yep, exactly. Vietnam. I see, and actually I'm gathering videos right now of a lot of these Vietnamese-looking Israelites. Basically, they straight up look like Korean or Vietnamese, but you can tell they're Jakes, right? They're straight. You got a little Vietnamese kid. They're dark-skinned, but he has an afro, right? Then they talk about, oh well, yeah, he doesn't know his parents, right? Because he came in the war. So our seed line, the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, they mixed all over the world. A perfect example for the Northern Kingdom, when the Spaniards came and they conquered the Tagalan people. Tagalan would be what we would refer to today as the Philippines, right? When Spain conquered the Tagalans, they were so far away from the islands of the Philippines. Oh, and by the way, they renamed the Tagalans by their by their king's name, King Philip, okay, of Spain. That's why the Filipinos today are called the Filipinos. So that shows you, man, that these are the fucking Edomites, man. They name lands after their own names, and even those people, hence the Tagalans, are being oppressed in their heritage, man. Well, here's the point I was making. Once the Spaniards conquered them, they set over the newly titled Filipinos, the Issacharites, basically the so-called Mexicans, over the Filipinos, okay? And you had a lot of mixing because of that. So again, yeah, so there's gonna be a lot of Filipinos who are gonna come out of the Philippines, out of Tagalog, and they're gonna look straight up Philippines, they're gonna act Philippines, they're gonna, you know, but they're gonna be Israelites because there's gonna be a spirit on them that's gonna show forth that love, that natural love for God, that seeking after the source, okay? That being the God of the Bible, and they're gonna seek after this truth, right? We already been, I'm sure a lot of you all can have seen those beautiful videos of those Filipinos and those Malaysians out there, you know, straight up calling upon Yahawah and YAHAWASHI, right? Out there teaching in the streets over there. And that's because, again, the seed line of Israel is mixed in with all people. But again, you're going to find, because of who we are as a people, how we basically naturally vibe towards each other, you're going to find that the seed line of Israel, even though we say it's mixed, even though we say what the Bible says, that the seed line of Israel is mixed amongst all the nations, you're going to find that our people are predominantly gathered together in a group of people, that being the Negro, Latino, Native Americans. Okay, and then you're going to start seeing that the remnant seed line, the Gentiles, they're going to be mixed amongst all the other nations. Okay, so again, it's not going to be huge numbers, right? There's going to be lots of them. There's going to be probably thousands upon thousands of Israelites mingled in amongst the Israelis, right? And that's because, again, you got to understand the vastness of the Earth's population. We're close to 8 billion people. Okay, so when you consider that 144,000 isn't that many, right, to be selected as the elect. But again, remember, besides the 144,000 that's going to be selected, 12,000 out of every one of the 12 tribes, there's also going to be 1 out of every 3 Negro, Latino, Native Americans who are going to be selected and pulled out of the world to be saved for the next iteration of this world's existence, right? That's where heaven is going to be, or earth is going to be as a heaven-like state, right? Earth is going to be heaven for the Israelites. It's going to be hell for the Edomites, and basically it's a challenging place for these other nations for the first 1,000 years, but after that it's going to be heaven for them too. Okay, so yeah, so good points, Doc. So water for bringing that up. So let's go and get back to the lesson, talking about, before we get to that kingdom of heaven where earth is turned back into heaven, let's go through these 5 empires which Daniel prophesied we would have to go through before the Messiah shows up at the end to start this world empire, which will never come to an end. Right, so we've now read how these things were written for our knowledge, right? All these things that were written from the beginning. And why is that? But because this is the assignment, okay? From the beginning of Adam to the end, when the Messiah comes up, it's going to be that we are that work that the Lord has done with great work, that He's made us perfect, right? The plant of the Lord. Okay, we're that grape that the Lord has been working so hard to create. Now, that being said, before that grape can be cultivated, or harvested, we would have to go through all these events. So let's go and get started, and let's go to the chapter where Daniel gives his vision of the end time to the king of Babylon, right? The king of Babylon was given a vision, a nightmare basically, that basically freaked him out. And this king, he wanted to have an interpretation of the Bible. So he went to all his astrologers, his soothsayers, his witches, warlocks, all these people, the mathematicians and everything, to try to figure out what was the meaning behind this devastating and horrible dream that the king had, right? Well, what happened is, eventually, one of the King Nebuchadnezzar II, by the way, he had heard that this man Daniel was a strong prophet, and ultimately Daniel, he ultimately was selected to be an interpreter of the dream that the Lord that this man had, the king had. Okay, and what we're going to read is that vision, basically what he told the emperor, or the vision that he's seen. Okay, and this is going to be found in Daniel's chapter 7. This is also spoken about in Daniel's 2, but in Daniel's 2, it's speaking a bit more about, it speaks about the description of the animal, okay? And Daniel 7 is talking about the characteristics of those animals or these empires, okay? So let's get started on Daniel chapter 7 verse 1. This is Daniel chapter 7 verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea. Like somebody got their fucking catalytic converter stolen. That being said, chapter 2, or actually chapter 3, and four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. So they were all different animals, okay? And remember, this sea that Daniel's seeing, that right there is the people of the earth. Okay, so out of these people of the whole earth, he's seeing these beasts come out of the sea of people, okay? And those people, those animals, excuse me, were all different from each other. And it says, and the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and as a man's heart was given it. Okay, and that right there is talking about the beast that represents Babylon, right? I forgot what they call it, but well, I know there's a term that they use for these huge statues they have over there called lamasu, which look like big ass bulls and stuff, and big animals. And they even have lions, but they have wings. But this is the image that basically refers to the kingdom of Babylon. And it says, verse 5, this is the second beast. And behold, another beast, a second like a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. Right? And that right there is talking about the Medo-Persian Empire, the empire that would come in and would basically take over Babylon. Now this ultimately happened right here in Daniel's basically in his era, right, when the Persian king, or the Persians came and took down the Babylonians. Now when this ultimately happened too, it tells you that those 3 ribs, by the way, were the nations was the Egyptians, Lydia, and Babylon. Okay, those were those 3 ribs in the bear's mouth that were taken down in the ancient times. Okay, and that bear was the Persian Empire. Okay, now that being said, and when it says there that that one leg was higher than the other, that refers to the Medo and the Persian Empire. Okay, so, or the Medes and the Persian, because today the Medes or the Persians would be broken up into multiple characters. That would be Iran, right? Which would be like the Persian side of it. The Medes which would be like the Indians, okay, or Pakistanis. Then you also got the Afghanistan and the Kazakhstan, like those people there. These are the people who the Medes come from today. Okay, so the thing is that empire, the Persians, I believe, is an empire that became the more powerful of the two. Hence why its leg was standing up, which is the interpretation of that. Okay, now let's continue. Verse 6, and this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings, and 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And that right there is talking about basically the leopard. Lucky, there you go. The leopard that represented the Grecian Empire. Now, this wasn't the original Grecian Empire, okay? Because the original Grecian Empire was basically populated by the people that we refer to today as like the Hawaiians, Samoans, the Fijians, right? The people of the South Seas. Well, what happened is that the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, basically today's Caucasian and Israeli race, they at this time were known as the Macedonians, and Philip, the father of Alexander the Macedonian, right? He was called like Alexander III, the Macedonian, who lived from 354 BC to 323 BC. He was or actually was it 323 or yeah, 323 BC, I think. Yeah. So what happened is the Macedonians would eventually become a great people, a very warlike people underneath King Philip, who would go out and would basically gather together all the Macedonian individual tribes, and he joined them together, and they became known as the Macedonians. As they grew as a people, they started to make alliances and war with the other nations around them, and one of these nations were the southern kingdom neighbors known as the Greeks. Okay, the Greeks, like I said, were the people that we know today as the South Seas. They eventually were conquered by the Macedonians, or people that we understand this as the rise of Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great was able to accomplish all these great feats in the world takeover because it was what it said right here. Let me read it again. And it said, I'm just going to read the last part. And dominion was given to it. Who is dominion? Who gave the dominion of the world to these Macedonians, who now are referring to themselves as the Grecians, the Neo-Greeks? That would be God of the Bible, right? God says that the hand of the heart, or I'm sorry, the heart of the king is in his hands. That the Lord is ultimately the one who setteth up men upon the throne, even the basis of men. This is the Lord giving the descendants of Esau their time under the sun, right? Their 15 minutes of fame, where he started to raise them up, and hence they could start living off of that blessing that they were given by their forefather, that being Isaac, right? Remember, Isaac was the father of Esau and Jacob. Now, Isaac had given a blessing to his son Esau, that he would live off the fatness of the earth, the dew of heaven, that he would overcome the oppression of his brother Jacob, right? We would stop ruling over him. He would break free from our rule, and that he would live by the sword, right? And that's why right now these Edomites, they're living out their heaven upon earth, right? Where they rule everything. And we can see what the world would be like if you let, Satan rule, right? And that's because these Edomites, who are the Antichrist of the Bible, they're currently ruling the world. Okay? Now, that being said, in this case here, the Lord is the person, or the Lord had given to these Edomites their power to start taking over the world. Okay? And these Edomites, they eventually, or Alexander the Great eventually would die, and he would give his kingdom to his 4 empires. Really, it was like 5, but the 5th one was like a short time. But eventually, ended up happening is that the 4 main general friends of Alexander the Great took the known world, right? Ptolemy, he had the southern kingdom for Egypt. You had Cassander, he took Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus took Thrace, Asia Minor, basically Turkey and that whole area there. And then you had Seleucus, who took Persia, right? He took over the Medes and the Persians. Okay, so this is why when you get into Second Ezra's, the Seleucian Empire, right? The Medes are coming against the Israelites during that time. Those are actually Edomites who are fighting with the Egyptians, who were also Edomites. Okay, and the Romans who came in to save them from the Persians, right? The Seleucid Empire. Those were Edomites in Rome. Okay, so again, you have to know a lot of this history to see how what's really going on. Hence, you understand what person is playing what character in the Bible. Then you get a true understanding, and you get the true narrative of the Bible. Okay, this is why when white people say, "Oh, that the Egyptians weren't African," they're right to a certain aspect. Right after the reigning of Ptolemy, the Egyptian emperors were white. Before that, they were Hamites, right? So that being said, let's continue. And it said, verse 7. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue of the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay, and those 10 horns, I'm just going to read them real quick. They're the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Gauls, Saxons, Vandals, Burgundians, the Franks, and the Lombards. Okay, these here, this is talking about the nation of what we would know as Rome. Okay, and now who were the Romans? Now again, just like Greece, the original Greeks were people of the South Seas. When you go over to Rome, the same thing with them. The original Italians, right? The people in that land, that they were known as what's their names? They were known as Rome, as Kittim, right? This nation here, Kittim, okay? Cyprus. Those were the original Romans, who were, again, people of the South Seas. Now, just like the Macedonians had came in and took over dominion over the Greeks, you could also look this up during, it's referred to in secular history as the Greek Dark Ages, right? Same thing that Esau did when he came into Europe and took Europe back from the Israelites during what's known as the Renaissance. They did that to the original Greeks during the Greek Dark Ages. Well, fast forward, or jumping over to where Rome was at, you had a group of Edomites start to dwell and start to grow in that land, and these Edomites, they started a small city known as Latinum. Okay, Latinum is where King Latin, or King Latinus, where he reigned. Okay, and when you get into the Bible, when it talks about the dukes of Edom, you have a king or a duke from Edom called Duke Lotan. That is King Latinus, the one that went over to Rome. Okay, and basically established Latinum. He established the language Latin, and that's where the Edomites basically grew from, and eventually from that base they would go on, and they would then have they would basically take over Rome for the most part. Okay, and this is where you get into Julius Caesar and his family coming from the Julii, from the mountains of Rome and all this stuff, right? This is where the Edomites took over. Okay, and they reigned for about 300 to 400 years by the time when the Republic of Rome, right? These Edomites, when they took over until they turned it into an empire, right? That's where Julius Caesar wanted to become emperor for forever and stuff, and they ended up killing him, and then it goes on from there. And then that only lasted for about 100 years until Jake started getting into the rulership seat, right? When you got Emperor Nerva, right? He was a so-called Negro. Okay, he was one of the first Israelites to sit on that throne, right? But he was only put there for safety, right? Because there was a lot of what is it called, infanticide, or basically where you had a lot of, or what is it called, kingicide or something, but basically, or monercide or something, basically where a bunch of kings were getting killed off one after another because they wanted to succeed each other, and they would kill their sons too, so that way they could get the seats. But again, that's a whole other story. I digress. Let's get back to this real quick. So back to the fourth piece that I just read, about that being the Edomites who took over Rome, which started off in Latinum, and they eventually spread, and they ultimately took over Rome. And when they took over Rome, they turned it into a devastating war machine, right? Like it tells you here in the scriptures, it had iron-like teeth. Now, why is that? Well, that's because the Romans were one of the first large nations, right, to really utilize the power of the iron, right, using it to make swords, shields, right, the spear ends of their spears, basically, right? And with that technology, right, and all the force that they had, because again, Romans were one of the first nations that allowed other nations to come into their army and become Romans, right, by joining on to the Roman Empire and becoming a citizen. Hey, Shalom, So that was one of the first things that separated the Roman beast from the other. Hence why it says it was that the fourth beast was diverse than all the other nations or the other beasts that came before it, because these other beasts like the Babylonians, the Persians, you couldn't, for example, be a Hamite in Africa and then join on to the Persian or Babylonian army, and now you were a Babylonian or Persian. No, that wasn't the way it worked, right? You were basically taken out of your land, or you were basically killed off. Well, these Romans, you could eventually, after being conquered by the Romans, being brought into their society, you could join up with the Roman army, okay, and you could become a soldier and hence win your citizenry. And this is why Rome, just like America, is a big mixing pot, and that's because that's that spirit that's on these Edomites, right? They gather all nations onto themselves, as it tells us about how Babylon would be, that it would gather all nations out of all people onto itself, okay? And why is that? Well, there's many reasons, but just like the Tower of Babel, where the first rebellious king, about 200 years after the flood, his name was Nimrod, he gathered all the known world at that time, which was around 200,000 to 300,000 people. He gathered them all to be one people and to have one language. And the Lord didn't want that at all, so he put a stop to that. So these Edomites, having that rebellious spirit upon them, because again, these Edomites, being that they descend from Esau, and being Esau is a reincarnation of Cain, he has that rebellious spirit on him. So hence he wants to go against what the Lord wants, which is the Lord wants separation, right? He wants to make a nation holy, right? That being the Israelites. And again, holy means to be separate, okay? Now that being said, that's one aspect of it. I think there's another aspect of it, right? And that goes back to my bank robber analogy, right? When you have a bank robber who goes into a bank, right? He steals the money from the bank, he sets it all up, but he also has these hostages. And now the cops are outside waiting for the bank robber. So what does the bank robber do? He tries to hide amongst the hostages in the bank robbery, and he tries to get out the front door along with all these hostages. That's what I feel that in some part, that's also what these Edomites are doing by mixing themselves in amongst the other nations, okay? Now that could be true to a certain aspect, but that's just my two cents on that. So hence when you go into the wheat, the parable of the wheat and the tares, right? So that's the devil that came in and sowed those tares. So again, going back to that example I gave earlier about Candace Owens, if her husband is not an Irish or not a Judite or is not a so-called white man that descends from the Judite line that created England back in the days, then he's an Edomite, and that means that Candace would have given birth to Edomites. Now, if her husband was descended from one of the Israelites who had, basically founded Europe and had, where King James' line is, and basically the blacks that ruled Britain and everything, if his line comes from that, which it definitely can, that means that the children that Candace Owens has are Israelites. Okay, but again, that there is going to be something that the Spirit's going to show through, and ultimately something we're going to learn in the kingdom, right? It really depends on what they do as a people, okay? And so that being said, let's go ahead and continue about the fourth beast, okay? Now it says, and actually before I get into that, actually, yeah, let me read about the fifth beast, okay? And then this is verse 9. This is Daniel 7 and 9. Actually, no, that's it. Yeah, that's it right there, because next it gets into the Messiah. But then, and then basically from chapter 7:19 all the way down to the end of that chapter, it talks about the characteristics of these beasts, okay? But one thing is that fourth beast that is explained there in Daniel's, that beast, it tells us that it would receive a grievous scar to its head, right? Basically, it would almost be put to death, but that it would still live and that it would ultimately come back, okay? And that beast is found, let's actually read it. Let's go to Daniel 2 and 33. Right, that basically the Roman Empire reborn, This is I'm gonna start at 32. Daniel chapter 2 and 32. The image's head, the images is talking about the statue, okay? The statue which ultimately would make up those 5, which is a combination of like the first animal, the second animal, which is the bear, third animal, which is the Grecians, and the fourth animal, which was the Rome, and then eventually would go into the 5th beast, which is really the 4th beast just coming back. That would be America. But let's read this, which is an explanation of the feet, which is that Rome, oh, I'm sorry, of the legs, which is the Roman Empire. Daniel 2 and 32. The image's head was of fine gold, his breasts and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest tell that a stone was cut out without hand, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now that stone that's going to come and it's going to take down out the feet, that big comet that comes and destroys the feet of miry clay and of and iron, right? The iron and the clay ultimately represents the Israelites mixing in with all the other nations, right? And also, but that comet that comes, that's YAHAWASHI, right? That's that rock that comes and makes and becomes a huge mountain, and that huge mountain is ultimately the kingdom of heaven that's upon the face of the earth. That fills the whole earth. Okay, so that's what that's talking about. Now that 4th beast that gets reborn again, it is seen again in a vision from John the Revelator. Right, John the Revelator, he sees this image. This can be found in Revelations. What is it? 12? Yeah. Revelations 12. That 4th beast that came originally as that beast that was seen with iron teeth that stomped down, you know, everything and basically destroyed everything. That was the Roman Empire. It's now come back again, but now it's the beast. Now it's a basically a 7-headed beast now. Okay, right? Which ultimately took over the world. Now, this beast is ultimately, when you get into it, this is the Edomite Empire that has grown to its full strength today, right? In these last days that we're living in, these Edomites have now conquered the world, and they've amassed a vast fortune of physical, you know, wealth, technology, weaponry, and also just knowledge. Okay, and they have all this at their disposal. And what do they do with it? They decide to clamp down more on the world, dominate it, and ultimately prepare to fight against God and his people, right? And why is that? Well, that's because these are the adversaries of God. Okay, they're the seed of the wicked. Okay, and they're naturally are rebelling. Okay, and let's go and read the description that John gave of this beast. This is Revelations 12 and 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet and upon her. And it tells you again, and then the woman is ultimately the amalgamation. It's basically the nation of Israel, the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, and all those whose fathers goes back to that lineage. Okay, that's what that woman is, Israel. Okay, and the moon, the sun represents wisdom, and the moon represents understanding, which is under her feet. Okay, which is why once we have that understanding, once we have the understanding of the scriptures and everything, we dominate it. Hence, you put your foot on top of it. Okay, and she's clothed with the sun. The sun is referred to as wisdom, right? Kind of like how God's wisdom is his words, His words are like fire, right? That's why we're clothed with it. It's the same clothing or spiritual garment that you're getting by gathering this wisdom of the scriptures, okay? So that woman clothed in the sun, standing upon the moon, is Israel in its perfected state, where we learn who we are as a people. We understand what our true power is. We have wrangled and dominated that understanding, right? These devils, these Edomites out there with their third-party accreditations, them trying to tell us how it is, that no longer is a thing. We're no longer listening to our enemies for their understanding, right? We understand the truth of the Bible because the Lord has now given it to us through our elders, our apostles, and our forefathers who have come and hidden this truth for us now till this day. So let's continue. Oops. So John seen Israel in heaven, and had her head a crown of 12 stars, and that's the 12 tribes of Israel. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. Right? That's Israel bringing forward this perfect child, that being YAHAWASHI. Okay. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. Okay, and that right there is ultimately the nation of Edom growing and becoming that large 7-headed dragon. Okay, with those 7 crowns, meaning that they had dominion over the areas where they started to grow. And what were these 7 empires that they created? Well, it's the Greeks, the Romans, the British, the Spanish, the French, the Germania Minor, and Germania Major. Basically all of Europe, okay? That's what these Edomites took over. Now, let's continue. And it says, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragons, and that right there is talking about when the latter end of the empire of these Edomites, their tail, that would be like the American Empire, right? The George Washington, those people, right? How they drew a third part of the stars of heaven. Okay, those third stars would be the Southern Kingdom, right? Who went into the North Atlantic slave trade. That's how they were cast down to earth, by the latter end of the Edomite Empire, or hence the tail of this dragon. Continuing, and the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. This is the story about when Herod, the Edomite king, who reigned over Jerusalem, right, by killing off the Maccabees, taking on one of the Maccabean daughters as their wives, to illegitimately try to claim the throne there in Jerusalem, right? Well, eventually, when he heard that the Messiah was being born, that the wise men, it wasn't just 3, it was a bunch of wise men who came from the east. They were more likely Zoroastrianists, who came from like Persia. Those people, those were like the astrologers, the wise men of those times, right? And that's what biblical commentary says that they were. They came and they told King Herod that there was the new king of the Jews was born, right? That's where you get the story about them going into all the Hebrew towns and killing all the children, the little babies and stuff like that. Okay, that's what that's talking about. Because again, this was that Edomite spirit upon these people, these Edomites, that wanted to ultimately just get rid of this righteous seed line of Jacob. Okay, that was Esau, having that internal spiritual hatred for his brother. It says, verse 5, and she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. Right, this is YAHAWASHI, right, coming back from the crucifixion, the death of crucifixion, coming back to life, and ultimately be taken back up to the Lord to reign along with the Lord, right, to be the person that we know as the Messiah, right? And it says, verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,200 days and 60, right? So this here is ultimately talking about how after that we would ultimately be scattered into the world, right? We would go into the ends of the world, right? The wilderness. Now this particularly is talking about there in Africa, where the Southern Kingdom went to, but this is also referring to all the nation, or how Israel, the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, how we would be scattered into all the world, into all the wilderness, and that we would ultimately dwell there until the end days, the times that we're now coming up across. And this is why the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, we've all ended up on this side of the earth, all for the most part living together, because from here, Babylon the Great, our place of our great captivity, we will be basically exited again, like it tells you, right, that the Lord brought us out of the northern kingdom, or the northern nation, or the northern land. Okay, talking about the new Exodus that's going to come. Let me see, and then let's continue here, verse 7. And there was war in heaven, right? This is talking about the coming war that's going to be happening up in the right over to the earth, right? And this is going to be these Edomites with their spaceships, their advanced technology, fighting with the so-called chariots, so-called UFOs, which really are the chariots of the Lord. They're going to be fighting in space and in the air. Okay, we're going to be seeing that, right? So it's not just going to be just in outer space. It's going to be within what we know as the sky, high altitude, low Earth orbit. There's going to be war, and that war is going to be between Esau, his NATO powers, his world powers that he controls over the world, and they're going to be fighting against these angels. And it says Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. So again, the dragon being these Edomite Roman empires, these guys, right? They're going to fight, okay? And that woman on top of this a beast, that right there is Babylon the Great, America, okay? And the thing is that these Edomite nations that are around the world, not only are they themselves, their nations, going to fight, but all the other sisters or all the other nations that they control are going to fight along with it, okay? And then that's what's going to be that great war in heaven. So when it says Satan fought and his angels fought, that's talking about these the dragon fought and his angels fought. That's talking about these Edomites and all the nations that are joined on to him, who are also going to fight. And it says, verse 8, and prevailed not, neither was their place found anymore in heaven, because eventually they're going to lose against the Lord. They're not going to be able to win, and ultimately all the power structure, all the force that these Edomites and their westernized powers project, are all going to be destroyed. They're going to be going up in smoke, okay? And then their place of reign is no longer going to be seen, right? You ain't going to be able to call up 911 or worry about any sort of things that the American government's going to do, because it is going to be gone. Verse 9, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, right? And that old serpent is talking about the same old serpent that was in the Garden of Eden, because again, it wasn't a physical snake that was talking. It was those people who came from the previous world civilization, the same people, the same group of people that Adam and Eve came out of. But this serpent was still practicing and living off of the knowledge, the forbidden knowledge of the old previous world, right? Astrology, magic, what the occultists get into today. Okay, the same thing that these Edomites practice. This is why you always see Edomites always get into magic and all this sorcery stuff, right? This is why they always push heavy all those Norwegian or those what is called those Greek gods and stuff, right? Norse gods like Zeus and Thor and all those people. Okay, continuing, it says, he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I beheld, and lo, and a low voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our power day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. Right? So there you go. See, so that right there tells you how ultimately our brethren, the one who is out there calling us the criminals, the robbers of the blessing, they're ultimately going to be cast down, because again, these Edomites, they're out here pretending to be the Jewish people. Just what was it, like 2 days ago, they burnt in a ceremonial practice, burning that red heifer that they've taken over there to the land of Israel to basically get those consecrated ashes so they can rebuild the third temple. But again, that shit is the false blasphemy that these Edomites are doing. Okay, and what are they doing while they're attempting to keep those temple rituals? They're accusing us, the true Israelites, to our power, right? Telling him that, you know, look at how wicked we are, practicing pagan rituals, right? This is why they're bringing out the Noahide laws, okay? Where basically the world lives under laws which were established during the Noah's time, okay? So again, these devils, they always accuse us to our power, not realizing them making us, you know, to follow our laws, because they don't tell us who we are. They keep up institutions like this to mislead our people, and they don't tell our people what really is going on and who we really are. They're causing us to be drunken on false philosophy. So, hey, Shalom, Mark, the water for joining. So, that being said, now that we see that, let's go back to Daniel, and let's continue reading, because eventually what's going to end up happening is all these, really five beasts, or the four beasts, the fourth coming back as the fifth animal, all this is going to come to an end, and that's what we're doing right now. Right now, that this seven-headed dragon, right, that beast of Revelation, it is now flying and doing all that shit that was doing in the Bible, creating all this devastation around the world, right, and basically, you know, putting to death Israelites. But pretty soon, this seven-headed dragon is going to be put to death. And how's that going to happen? Well, what's going to eventually end up happening is that the Messiah is going to show up. And right here, Daniel's going to explain the Most High giving the Messiah the command to then go out and ultimately conquer and to bring forward the destruction upon these Edomites, and then hence kill the fourth beast that came back as the fifth beast. And this is that famous image that where you see Michael coming down and stabbing the dragon of Revelation. That's what that's talking about, or that's what that's all about. So let's read this. This is back in Daniel 7 and 9. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit. This is God, Yahawah, right? Yahawah is Hebrew for He is. Okay, this is the God of the Bible. It says, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garments were white as snow, and the hair and his head like the pure wool, meaning he had like a white woolly hair, like what you see on Morgan Freeman, right? And his beards too, because it says his head and his hairs. Okay, so his beard, his hair, it was woolly. Okay, like what we see, like I said again, on Morgan Freeman. And it says his throne was like the fire flame, and his wheels are burning fire. Basically, he's seeing a UFO, right? He's seeing those UFOs which look like wheels, right? And coming out of them is what you would see as like flames, or like you see that light underneath the UFO. And it said, verse 10, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands of thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him, and judgment was set, and the books were opened. I beheld then, because the voice of the great words which the horn spake, and beheld, even till the beast was slain, that his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Okay, this is ultimately talking about the coming destruction that's going to come upon America, right? And the NATO forces, which is ultimately the Lord's judgment upon the nation of Edom and their empire, right? This is going to be the end of the world, okay? Now, this doesn't mean that the whole earth is going to blow up like I was saying in the beginning, but this means that this is going to be the end to the Edomite power structure and the status quo upon the face of the earth. After this happens, World War III takes place, and the seven-headed beast is flung into that lake of fire, which is America, ultimately burning up because all the nuclear weapons and bombs are going to be dropped on it, along with all the chariots just blasting her with laser beams. Like it tells you, right, that fiery stream, right, that with the mixed tempest, the fiery breath, and all these things, all that is going to destroy America, Israel, the NATO power, and that's ultimately going to take out all the power structure of the world, leaving no real rulers to rule over the world. And then what's going to happen? Then the Messiah is going to show up and take his crown, right? Hence why it said how the thrones were cast down, and that's what's ultimately going to be the end of that seven-headed dragon-like beast. Okay, it's going to be the end of these Edomites in power. They're going to fall from heaven like lightning, right? They're going to be taken out of power like that. That being said, for us Israelites, it is our jobs to learn first who we are, right? Who our God is, and why is he only our God? And then second, understand where we are in these prophecies. Well, we were just reading through the four beasts, right? And that eventually will become the fifth beast that foretold the events of this world through its empires. Okay, and we read how the end would ultimately bring forward the death of the last empire, or the last beast, that being the empire of these Edomites, okay, which is represented by that seven-headed red dragon, okay, which again was originally that snake the old snake in the Garden of Eden. Okay, so this is for us. So now that we've learned all this stuff, this is ultimately what the Lord's message to us Israelites are. Now a lot of us, this is already, falling on I'm preaching to the choir, but again, this is for those Israelites, you Negro, Latino, Native Americans, or anybody whose father's lineage goes back to that bloodline. This is the message for you if you haven't heard it yet, okay? If you're not fully sold on this Hebrew Israelite truth. Let's see, this is Isaiah 55:6. Seek ye the Lord, Yahawah, BAHASHAM YAHAWASHI, while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. And let him return to Yahawah, BAHASHAM YAHAWASHI, and he will have mercy upon him, and to our power, for he will abundantly pardon. Okay, and that's ultimately what we have to do as Israelites, right? We have to learn this doctrine. We got to learn this history of who was who in the Bible, or throughout history, so we know what their position in the Bible also is. Because again, remember, the people written about in the Bible are the same people that exist on the face of the earth today. Now, what has been destroyed is that connection between the Bible people and the true world people, okay? And that was done on purpose, so that way you wouldn't know who is who. And that's why the Lord has brought us back here, starting with our elders, the apostles, on down, to give that information, to remove that covering cast upon all the nations, so that way you know who you are in according to what the Bible says, and this way you then learn what is your destiny. Okay, are you going to be a valiant Israelite, or you not meant for this truth, right? But either way, if you've been watching this video for this long, you've been staying tuned to this lesson, and this message is for you. Okay, because you're not going to have heathens watching or caring about this information. So either way, I just wanted to kind of go into this, Akim. Hopefully I was able to go through Daniel's vision and tie it to the beast found in Revelations, and explaining how we are now living in that last beast period, and is currently now getting ready to go into that war with God. Hence which, if you watch my lesson from this last week, talking about how that NASA sees, what is it called, 3-1 Atlas or 3-eye Atlas comet. They believe that it's a chariot. Okay, but again, they're saying, oh, it's a comet and it's an interstellar comet, and we don't know too much about it. So, but the point being is that this is the things that we have to start to gather all this information and bring it together, because it all ties into the Bible, and it gives us an idea of what we're supposed to be doing in these end times, when we're so close to these end days at the end of the fifth beast coming back. So, all right, either way, Akim, hopefully you were edified. Let's go and give all honor and glory and praises to Yahawah, BAHASHAM YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM QADASH, Barakateh Yahawah, Barakateh YAHAWASHI, Barakateh Yahawah, Barakateh YAHAWASHI, Barakateh Yahawah, Barakateh YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM QADASH. Shalom, Akim. Thank you for joining, and I'll catch you, Akim, next week. Shalom.